I don't know how many years I've been driving the big rigs across this country now. Seems like forever. I'm not complaining though. I actually enjoy the solitude of the long hauls and the camaraderie of the other truckers you pass in the night or trade stories with at an all-night truck stop. I guess a lot of people wouldn't be able to handle the overnight hauls day after day like I do, but I've always been a bit of a night bug, so that really doesn't bother me. Whether it's open interstate or miles of desert road or even little highways through backwood towns in the wee hours of the morning, there's just something comforting about knowing you're delivering the products and materials needed to keep these sleeping towns going during the day. Plus, being a big guy like I am, I've never really worried about my safety or security on the roads at night. Well, except for this one night not too long ago. That night, well, it still leaves me a little spooked if I start to think about it too long. That night, well, what happened was just unexpected. I was hauling a full trailer that night, a load that was taking me nearly from one coast clear across to the other. I tend to sleep during the day and drive mostly at night, beats the heat and keeps traffic to a minimum. Usually around 6 or 7 a.m., I'll pull into a truck stop, clean myself up, then curl up in the sleeper cabin in the back of my cab, maybe watch something streaming on my phone for a bit, then get some sleep until 6 or so in the evening. Then I'll get up, stretch a bit, take care of business, get back on the road, catch something to eat at some point, and drive the rest of the night with only the sound of my wheels and my various audiobooks and music to keep me company. That's my routine, and it's served me well all these years. Now this night I had just woken up and the sun was well on its way below the horizon for the evening. I jumped out of my cab, went into the convenience store part of the truck stop I had been parked at, and relieved myself before grabbing a few bottles of water for the night ahead. In line for the cashier ahead of me was a pretty young lady who was being super polite to the clerk, an older lady named Mona that I knew very well from my travels through this town. The young lady had brown hair that was cut pretty short and was wearing jean shorts, a t-shirt, and what looked like new tennis shoes. She stood out to me because not only was she unusually polite for someone her age, but she was also buying about 3 sugary sodas and at least 5 different candy bars. I was standing close enough in line behind her that I could tell she smelled very sweet as well, and I thought to myself with a smile that maybe the reason she was such a sweet person was all the sugar she seemed to enjoy consuming. It made my stomach growl inaudibly, and I thought I should probably find something to eat myself soon, but junk food wasn't for me. The young lady paid for her goods and carried them out the door in a small plastic bag as Mona rang me up for my waters. I chatted politely with her as always, and she told me to be safe on the road as she always did. I promised her that yes ma'am I would be and told her to have a good night as well. This particular truck stop had truck fueling stations and a large open lot for parking in the back. In the front were passenger vehicle fueling stations. There weren't any shower facilities or diners or fancy stuff like that, but it was convenient and there wasn't a charge for overnight parking as long as I filled up with diesel while I was there. I hopped up into my cab and made the necessary entries for mileage and fuel into the onboard trip computer that would report back to my headquarters. Everything is computerized these days, and my employer can pinpoint me with GPS tracking no matter where I am along my route. That don't concern me, though. I never dawdled, and I was always where I was supposed to be when I was supposed to be there. I slowly pulled my rig around from the back of the facility and began making my way toward the exit that would get me back on the road and back on my way to deliver my cargo. The sun had nearly completely disappeared now, and I had 11 hours of open road ahead of me until I would stop again for my next rest period. I pulled to a stop just briefly before I set off so I could settle my phone in its holder arm and pull up the audiobook I had been listening to the day before. I looked up and saw the young lady from the checkout line. Now, in my mind, I decided to call her Candy because that was basically all I knew about her, making her way to a large garbage can near the door of the convenience store with her hands full of trash that she must have collected from her vehicle as she prepared to get back on the road herself. Hers was the only passenger vehicle on the lot at the time. The driver door was open and she had parked it all the way across the lot from the convenience store next to the pay-for-air station. She must have also been checking her tire pressure. Smart girl. I was about to put my rig into gear and take off when, just out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadow moving in the bushes next to Candy's vehicle. As I watched, A chill went through me. Whoever had been hiding in the bushes stepped forward, opened the back door of Candy's small four-door sedan, got in, and closed the door behind them. Somebody was hiding in this poor girl's car now, and she had no idea. Her back was still turned away from her vehicle. I needed to warn her before something terrible happened. Unfortunately, I couldn't just roll down the window and yell. My rig wasn't close enough to the convenience store, and I doubt she'd be able to hear me over the sound of my engine anyhow. I set the parking brake and quickly hopped down from my cabin, intending to try to catch up to the girl before she got to her vehicle. I couldn't see who had gotten into her car, but I knew that whoever it was, they were up to something evil. I ran across the parking lot toward her, and the girl spotted me. "Hey!" I called out, trying to wave in an urgent but friendly manner. I could see her expression immediately melt like a candy bar on a dashboard on a hot summer day. I must look like some crazy person myself running toward her and shouting. Still, she was in danger. "Miss!" I shouted out. "Miss, there's someone in your car!" She had taken off running by this point, her face a mask of fear. I'm sure she didn't hear a word I said, or if she did, she probably thought it was just a stalling tactic to close the distance between us. "Miss, please!" I shouted as I got nearer to her car. Look, I'm not in the best of shape, I'll admit, so I was panting pretty hard. Admittedly, I probably looked more like a psycho than whatever was on her floorboard. Her engine turned over without delay and her tires squealed as she tore out of the parking lot. "Shit," I said to myself. As her car pulled away and came to a stop, I could see the figure of someone rise up quickly from her back seat and look back at me. Although I couldn't see anything but a shadow, I knew it was looking at me mockingly. It ducked quickly back down out of sight. Her car pulled off onto the road, heading back toward the interstate on-ramp. She was heading the same direction I was. I might be able to catch up with her and warn her. I ran back to my rig, its engine still idling, and hopped inside. Sweat was already dripping from my brow, and my chest felt like it might explode. I was breathing so hard, but that didn't matter. Candy, that sweet girl, was going to be attacked by someone else. My stomach grumbled again, but I had to ignore that for now. There would be plenty to eat later. I released the parking brake and pulled forward and out of the parking lot, trying to keep the girl's vehicle in my sight. As I finally turned onto the road leading to the interstate, I could see her vehicle turning onto the on-ramp. I should be able to catch up to her without a problem once I got onto the open interstate. I pushed my rig through the gears as quickly as I could safely, and by the time I had merged onto the interstate, I was already nearing 60 miles per hour. Up ahead, a single set of taillights, those must have been Candy's, were cruising in the dark in the rightmost lane. I pushed my trailer harder, upping the speed to try to catch up to her. Thankfully, it seemed she must not have realized that I was following her, as her speed seemed to stay near the speed limit. I pushed harder to close the gap between our vehicles. There was some light traffic on the road at this point on the interstate, and I guess we must have been nearing a major town. I was getting closer to Candy's vehicle, but I was being constantly impeded by all the usual assholes who cut us truck drivers off, or get in front of us and quickly slow down, or just drive up beside us to give us the finger. Well, regardless, Candy's vehicle was getting closer now, and thankfully she was driving responsibly, which meant whoever was in her back seat had yet to make himself known to her. Finally, I got within close enough range to be directly behind her vehicle. Son of a bitch! The person in the back seat was now up on their knees on the floorboard, directly behind Candy's driver's seat. Unless she looked carefully, she wouldn't even notice. My heart sank as I watched the person in the back seat raise what appeared to be a weapon of some sort, maybe a small hatchet, I'm not sure. I downshifted and pushed my rig closer to Candy's car as I pulled the air horn line above me. A loud noise issued forth and I flashed my headlights to try to get Candy's attention. The person in her back seat ducked back down just as I could see her looking in the rearview mirror. I tried to motion to her to pull over. Instead, her little sedan shot forward. She had obviously been spooked and perhaps thought I was the one after her. She may have even connected the semi in her rearview mirror to me from the parking lot and thought I was trying to run her down. Shit, I said out loud and sped up as much as my rig would allow me to. I reached toward my phone and began dialing 911. Hopefully she was too. I saw the person in her back seat pop up again, this time immediately going into an attack pose. I stopped trying to dial and blew the air horn and flashed my lights again. The figure went back down. I flashed my lights again, hoping that would keep the figure down and perhaps Candy would understand the danger she was in. Instead, she switched lanes suddenly to the leftmost lane and hit her brakes, flying behind me as I continued to speed forward. I engaged the air brakes to bring the semi to a halt and just barely had time to look in the huge mirror out the right-hand side of the rig to notice the young lady's sedan cutting across all lanes of the interstate and taking the exit we had just passed. "Shit, shit, shit," I said out loud, banging my fists on the steering wheel. My tractor had come to a complete stop, but Candy was gone now and she was in grave danger. I looked toward the GPS system in my vehicle. My employer would not appreciate me making a detour with this load, but I couldn't let this sweet girl stay in danger. I quickly noticed that the next exit ahead had a cutover road that would lead me to the road she had exited on. I accelerated, pushing through the gears as quickly as I could. I could only hope maybe she called 911 by now and the person in the seat behind her had stayed put. The cab of my tractor rattled and shook violently as I flew off the interstate off-ramp onto the blacktop below at a speed that was well beyond what safety would have called for. I could feel the trailer behind me trying to lose control. Thankfully, it was dry out and luck was with me. I managed to maintain control. It seemed to take forever, but I finally came to the intersection that would give me access to the road that Candy had exited onto. A sinking feeling came over me. I somehow just knew that I was too late. After a couple of minutes on a patchy, uneven road, I was finally able to turn left on the vast expanse of highway that Candy had exited on almost 10 minutes earlier. This highway was in the middle of nowhere, and I knew it well. Off the interstate, this highway ran through a long, lonely stretch of isolated desert. There were no streetlights on this stretch for miles and miles, and nothing but desert on either side with the shape of shadowy, eerie mountains in the distance. Ordinarily, it would be beautiful, but tonight it just looked menacing and cold. I could see some taillights illuminated up ahead, and I prayed that it was Candy's vehicle and that she was still okay. I accelerated. Reaching over to my phone, I once again attempted to call 911, but my phone beeped back at me. On the screen were the words, "No service." Shit. I forgot that this stretch of highway with its open expanses of gorgeous desert was also devoid of cell phone towers. There wouldn't be a signal for at least another 15 or 20 miles. That meant that Candy likely didn't have time to call for help either. I sped up and my trailer shook and shimmied as it tried to maintain control on the poorly maintained highway. Between the extreme desert heat of the day, the low number of vehicles that still use this road, and the contracting cool of the evening, this particular highway really didn't stand a chance of staying in good shape for long, even after fresh repairs. Candy's taillights came up on me suddenly, almost like they were coming toward me instead of I'm toward them. I braked hard to slow down and came up right behind the vehicle with only a single car length or so to spare. Candy was driving very slow for some reason, well below the speed limit. I let a little more distance get between us so I could see into her back window. The figure in her back seat was clearly visible. One arm appeared to be wrapped around the driver's seat. He must have her in a headlock, threatening her. I pulled on the air horn again, releasing a jet of loud noise into the night in front of me. I flashed my headlamps. The figure looked briefly behind itself and directly at me, its eyes seeming to glow in the brightness of my high beams. I could tell it was a man, but not much else. The figure turned back toward Candy in the driver's seat and seemed to strengthen his hold on her. Her brake lights illuminated and she began to swerve slightly as her vehicle began to slow down. I blew the horn again, flashed my lights, and began applying my brakes. Candy's vehicle went off the road to the right and began to come to a stop. I followed closely behind her, making as much noise and light as I could. The figure seemed to be directing her. Further into the desert sand her sedan went, and I followed behind. Within seconds, though, my wheels were bogged down in the sand, as were Candy's, and we came to a stop. Leaving my engine to idle, I set the parking brake and threw open the door to my cab. I jumped down and began running through the sand and rushed toward Candy's sedan about 1/10 of a mile away. I could see her rear driver door open, followed by hers. Closing in, I slowed down abruptly as I saw what got out of the car behind Candy. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows from my headlights in the distance, but the more it moved, the more I was sure of what I saw. Long, thin, metallic-looking legs, much too large for a human, stepped into the sand from her car, unfolding like some sort of wicked lawn chair spreading out on a beach. As it completely stood, I realized that this thing was growing, impossibly, from the size of a man to at least 8 feet tall. I was hypnotized as I crept forward, watching as it metamorphosed and transformed into what appeared to be a giant insect of some sort. With a strong, shiny exoskeleton and spiky, hideously sharp long legs and arms, it had pincers on each end of its arms that could cleanly and easily decapitate a fully grown man with one snap. I heard Candy scream now as I approached, a scream full of terror and fear and surprise. I had heard that sound before, but never realized just how hideous, soulful, beseeching, and sad it really was. "Hey!" I screamed out toward the creature. It was only 10 or so yards away now. Its huge almond-shaped head contained compound black shiny eyes and a large gaping mouth that grew out beak-like into a razor-sharp scissors-like jaw, perfect for slicing and slurping up prey. If you combined a common cockroach with a praying mantis and made it 8 feet tall, you might come close to what I saw that night. Candy screamed again. She was looking from me to the creature and back again, trying to back away. "Hey, asshole!" I screamed, walking closer to the creature, only vaguely aware that I was completely unarmed. The huge insect-like creature finally heard me and turned toward me, releasing Candy from its grip. The poor girl had deep, bleeding gashes in her throat from where the creature's razor-sharp exoskeleton had punctured her neck while attempting to restrain her. A piercing, ear-shattering noise spewed forth from the disgusting thing as it screamed out at me. It was giving me this look like, "Bruh, why you interrupted my meal? Wanna fight?" Candy, her neck a vibrant red and the headlights on my rig, had taken out her cell phone. She couldn't call 911. What was she? Candy held out her phone at arm's length as a small white light at the back came on. She was recording. "Honey, this is not the time to be making TikToks," I thought. The creature turned to look at Candy, saw what she was doing, and turned back to me, cocking its head as it let forth another series of screeching noises that I could tell meant, "Dude, look what you done now. You want this shit on the internet?" "Hey, ma'am," I shouted toward her. "Ma'am, put the phone down. You need to wrap something around your neck and put pressure on it to stop that bleeding." As soon as I said bleeding, the creature turned back toward the girl and screeched a hungry, fearless screech at her. Candy screamed again, but she kept recording anyhow. The creature stepped toward her, its limbs folding and unfolding in that peculiar, smooth yet jerky way that insects have. It raised one limb up and opened its pincer, turning it to the side and opening it wide. It was gonna decapitate her. "Hey, jackass!" I screamed, running to catch up with the giant bug. "Why don't you leave her alone, you ugly-ass bag of insect dicks?" The insect made a swipe at Candy, tearing into her midsection with its surgically sharp pincer. Her t-shirt turned immediately red, and Candy was thrown backward to the sand. It had just made sure she would be too weak to flee so it could come back to finish its meal after it dealt with me. Candy screamed, still recording the whole scene. Thankfully, this wasn't being live streamed, or this would have been a real shit fest. The creature came up to me, both slick, hard, prickly arms raised, clicking its pincers together in hatred and anger. "We can talk about this," I said to the creature as it approached. In response, it screamed out again, louder than ever. "You really don't want to do this, buddy," I said, backing toward the headlights of my rig, hoping to be able to flee to the cabin if needed. The creature raised its pincers even higher and screamed again, a war cry if I had ever heard one. Then, just like that, it charged at me. And just like that, it was over. I hated having to do it, but I did it. The sharp and acrid smell of insect blood seemed to fill the entire desert air around us. Candy screamed and screamed, but it seemed like her voice was getting weaker. Cautiously, slowly, I walked nimbly over to the young lady, being careful not to step on the various disgusting bug parts that now littered the sand around our vehicles. I bent down as much as I could, it wasn't easy in that form, so I could be close to the girl now bleeding out on the sand. She held the phone up at me, still recording, her breath ragged and wheezing now. "I know who you are," she said in gasping breaths. "I know," I said, but I doubted she could understand me. My jaw no longer had the correct positioning to speak in any language she could understand. My exoskeleton and sharp, pointed pincers made it nearly impossible for me to comfort her without shredding her to ribbons. It was a real shame that another one of my kind had decided to make the stupid decision to feed on someone that probably had a family that would miss her, that would ask questions, that would keep the case warm until they died. That's why we insect folk tend to feed on the homeless and derelict, the forgotten of society that the world would never miss, the elderly or insane, the lost and abandoned. With one quick movement, my pincered arm grabbed and destroyed her phone with bullet-like precision. Candy's eyes went wide and she screamed again. "I know your plates. I'll tell everyone," she threatened. Ouch. Wrong thing to say to a hungry bug in the middle of the night. "No, I'm sorry, ma'am, you won't," I tried my best to say through my long, sharp, clacking jaws. Now, I guess it was just a lucky break that no other car had been on the highway that night when everything took place. I had just enough time to dispose of my fellow man's carcass and Candy's phone by using my strong pincers and exoskeleton to grind them quickly to dust before I transformed back into the friendly redneck form I usually inhabit. I grabbed a new set of clothes from my sleeper cabin and got back on the road. I still had a load to deliver after all. In the coming weeks, police would put out a missing persons report for Candy, whose real name I would find out was Melissa Jessup. Melissa was preparing to graduate from a local university. She was just 22 years old. She'd been on the way to spend a few days with her boyfriend during a school break when she stopped for gas at the worst possible time. She also had a large, loving family who very much wanted to find whomever had kidnapped her and left her car out in the desert. On TV, her father begged through tears for answers and for the kidnappers to just let her come home alive. I felt so sorry for them because I knew they would never get the answers or justice they wished for. I wish it hadn't been that way. I wish I'd never been involved. I wish I had never seen that creature get into the back of her car to begin with. But too many things had gone wrong too quickly for the outcome to have been any other way. After all, our race, our kind, was almost exposed to the entire world that night because of one stupid member among us. And we would have been if cell phone towers had been just a little closer in range that night. It still spooks me to this day and guides me to be extra careful when I need to feed. I can't help what I am, but I can try to be as considerate as possible, you know. Oh, and maybe this is a bit too much information, but just in case you were wondering, yes, Candy, well, Melissa, she was just as sweet as I thought she would be, and she kept my belly full for quite a long time before I needed to feed again. Now, folks, be kind to the truckers on your roads. You never know who or what you might run into.